Get ready before life happens. The podcast helping you navigate life's what ifs.
Welcome to the Before Life Happens podcast with Tony Stewart. Today I'm joined by Dr. Alison Schmidt, founder and CEO of Unconvention and host of the Unconversations podcast. Alison, welcome to the show. Great to have you here today.
Thank you, Tony. I really appreciate it. I was honored when you asked me to come onto your podcast, so thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. You're doing some really cool things, and I just love your style of thinking. So I'm like, wow, I got to have you on the show. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story, and how did it lead to you focusing on being unconventional?
Well, I think that started when I first came out of the womb. I have always been a very unconventional, always asking why, inquisitive type person, wanting to know why things are done the way that they're done. And I think that's kind of how I have just kind of always been. I've always just been that kind of level of inquisitive person. And I kind of instill some of that, with even in my clients.
Well, that's fantastic because, I feel the same way. Is like you have to look at problems differently. You have to come up with a different approach. We get so set in doing things in the conventional way,
Yeah.
but it leads to the same results. So it's really exciting, that you're challenging that convention. So, I mean, what do you feel the reaction has been, in your work? We've talked, how you evolved from an executive coach. How did that evolution go? And is it
Yeah.
working?
Yeah, so I actually had a company called ALS Group. We focus on mergers and acquisitions, strategic planning, a lot of process improvement work. And I kind of lost a bit of that excitement because I wasn't really working with people. And I wanted to, that's why I got a degree in organizational psychology. So I love to understand people, what drives them, what motivates them, what makes them want to be successful. And so that's really how I got into the whole branding of my business of Unconvention. And that's really how I started my podcast a year ago, which I'm very excited, called Unconversations, where I feature and highlight unconventionally excellent leaders, CxOs, founders, entrepreneurs. And through that podcast and through the work that I'm doing, it's really challenging the status quo of how people need to be and act in their own businesses. There isn't just one way to do something, and there's multiple ways. And just because someone's running their business one way doesn't mean that that necessarily is going to work for you. And so sometimes I really help my clients and the guests that I've had on the podcast. There's been this really big theme of quieting the noise that's out there and really focusing on what it is that you want to be, how you want to serve your clients. And when I was rebranding, it was really hard for me to find people to work with because they too wanted to put me in this box. So this is what a consultant does. This is what an executive coach does. And what it wasn't doing is it wasn't bringing out me and my uniqueness, because I do look at things in a very different way than other people do. I think it's one of my gifts, and I can really kind of get really deep below a problem and be able to see things that sometimes my clients and other people have more of a difficult time. So I kind of, people call it a superpower. And I think it is one of my superpowers that I didn't, I think a while ago didn't really know and understand, but it's something I have really embraced.
Well, that's awesome. And I think for so many people, especially when you're starting out, is you want to go with the flow, do what's conventional. What would you say to encourage people to really start to be themselves? I guess even to say be authentic, which is unconventional. We're all unconventional to some degree.
I will tell you, when I have been in this field for over 30 years, and it was weird. I was talking on a podcast yesterday. I had so many people telling me that I should start a podcast. And I was like, okay, great. Of course, there's not a lot of podcasts out there. Of course, I'll jump into this. And then when I decided to do this, then when I was reaching out to people to talk to them about guests, it was like, well, what's in it for them? And I kept thinking, like, well, wait a minute, what happened to the, hey, you should do this podcast? And now I'm not really getting a lot of support over here. And so sometimes, we're told go to your family and friends and all that. And for me, I have actually gotten more support going outside of my family and friends. So already there was a different way. I've been getting so much love and support around the podcast, and the people who my early adopters of the podcast, it's almost like trying to get your first client, right? Like, believe in me, I can really help you. It was almost that sort of feeling with the podcast, because I had nothing to show them, but just this great idea, trust in me that I would take care of them through the process. I would come out with a great product. And so what I would really say is, first start in believing in yourself. Get your self's approval first, because if you really believe it, then you're going to be able to convince other people to be able to believe in what it is that you're wanting to do. And then work on getting the other people to believe in you. And I think we forget to trust in ourselves, and trust sometimes that we have the tools within ourselves to help execute what it is we're wanting to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Well, I had that reinforced. I did improv comedy, and that's one of the things, with improv comedy is you're up there on stage, and if you don't fully believe in whatever you're doing, the audience isn't going to believe it either. And you're not a comedian, so you don't have jokes written. You're not an actor. You're not going off a script. You just have to build this reality, but you have to believe it. So, if there's anybody watching and listening, if you want to see a great example, this is Stephen Colbert and his monologues. He'll like have
Absolutely.
an object, and if he has a glass, he'll put it down. So you believe that he's actually holding a glass, even though everybody knows he's not.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. Yeah.
so
100%. I agree with you on that.
yeah. So, believing in yourself, that's a big lesson for all of us. That if you don't believe in yourself, your clients are also going to see that as well. And it'll come through in your work relationships, with your supervisor, that they will see it as well. If you're a leader, and you don't believe in the plan. I'm reading a book right now about Napoleon, and some of his plans are pretty crazy,
Yes.
but he really did not lack for confidence at all. And he was very successful for a long period of time.
Yeah, and I had a great person on my podcast. Her name is Stacy Tang. She's a CEO of Bespoke Beauty Brands, and I launched her podcast earlier this month. And one of the things that really resonated with me, and I was so happy she shared it, because it's something I felt inside of myself. But she sort of, not, of course, I will paraphrase for her, but you know, she said that she's been given more bad advice over the years than she has good advice. And that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, in my opinion, that the people didn't necessarily have her best interest at heart, but it could have just been either they were fearful to do what she wanted to do, or, sometimes we're projecting our own thoughts, ideas, insecurities on someone else, and that could be preventing someone from really doing something amazing and shining. So I think sometimes to take what people are telling you, mull it over a bit, see if it works in your playbook, and then if it doesn't, say thank you and keep moving in the direction that you want to move towards. And I thought that was just fantastic, and it has really sat with me because the times that people have recommended things to me, I know it's coming from a good place, but I need to decipher, does that advice really work for me or keep going down the path that I want to go down?
Yeah, I think that's so important. And, in financial services, you see that so often as people make the recommendations more because that's what they think they're supposed to be doing, or they let their own judgment, maybe they're risk averse and they let that come into their decision making. So you have to really believe in yourself and what you believe in, because it is going to color how you deal with your clients. And if you're not an advisor, as a consumer, if you're dealing with certain things and you're making a decision whether or not to buy a financial service product or buy a car or lead your team, is those things are always going to come in. We call it money stories in the financial world. As your experiences with money are going to impact your financial decisions, and your emotions are going to.
Yeah, and I think you also bring up something else as you were talking about that. I also think too is, we all need to make money in our business, and we want to attract clients that we know that are going to bring obviously money to us. But I will tell you, there are times where I have taken on clients because eventually I believe I can't do this all the time, of course, but I do take on clients where I do believe that their success is eventually going to come, and I want to be there for that. And I think sometimes if we don't spend enough time getting to know somebody because either their company is not where we want them to be financially, or their bank account for investment isn't where it needs to be as we hope. And I feel sometimes when we make those quick judgments about people that we really could be missing out on a really long term relationship client. Because I have people who have they would not normally take me on as a client, but because they were believing in my mission, my values, how I am as a person, and where I want to grow my business and do things in the world, they've taken a chance on me. And so I definitely do that in my business as well. And I think in some industries, we forget about that, and we're just focused on what the person has from a material side of things, or what their next stage is going to be, and that can make us X amount of money. When I try to balance that out in my business as best I can.
Yeah, I think that's a really important observation. Missing, what is it with the forest for the trees,
Yes.
I can't think
Yeah.
of the saying,
Yeah.
but, you
Yes.
know, yeah, that's exactly it. Is you have to take a look at the bigger picture, part of it with clients, is this a good client that you want to work with for the long term? But really, what is that long-term relationship going to look like? Because we can either be transactional or we can build relationships. You can't do both. So, one of the things is that you do talk about is that clients can feel treated as transactions. Is why do clients often feel treated as simply transactions?
I mean, I can give you a perfect example is not fully kind of understanding what your client really wants, and you're basically like, "Hey, this is how much it's gonna be," if you will. I can give you a perfect insurance. We called our insurance company. We had an issue with our home, and the woman that I spoke to, she was very transactional. Everything was transactional. There wasn't anything that she was empathizing. I'm very sorry you're experiencing this at your home. I understand how stressful this can be for you. Basically, she more spent the time of telling me all the things that could possibly go wrong and how this may not be covered when I already knew this was going to be covered. And I was very happy to get to the next person who just, I need to answer 2 questions. And she said, "Hey, I'm glad we're able to take care of this for you. You'll have the money deposited in your bank. And, please let us know if there's anything else you need further during this process." It was like a night and day experience within the same insurance company. And so that is how it is even in my business. I want to focus more on first what it is my clients want, what they're hoping to achieve, and then be able to accomplish things in a reasonable time for them. So I'm not about, cookie cutting. Here's a package for you. Let me know if you like the package. I can tweak the package. That's not what I'm about. I'm really honestly about, and my company is about what it is my clients really want and making sure we understand that. And the other important thing that I think is really crucial, my company may not be right for everybody, and that is okay. And also, my company might not be ready for someone right now, but that doesn't mean that they can't be ready down the line. So, in putting this in perspective, I had a client where they just weren't ready. I could just tell their heart, their mind, their soul, they just weren't ready to go through the services that my company had outlined. It wasn't that they didn't agree with it, but I could just tell the readiness was not going to be there. And so I told her I didn't even think this was the best time right now for them to go through this process. When she felt that their company was here, I gave them kind of like a checkpoint. I said to them, "Come back to me so we can talk through it." And that client was so appreciative that I gave them the breathing room. I also was understanding how they were feeling. And on top of that, I actually made more money on the project with them than I would have at the very beginning stage. And I still work with this client to this day. So to me, just because they didn't sign on the dotted line that minute, doesn't mean that there's not going to be the time that the sale is still there. The relationship is still there. And I think that sometimes we forget. If someone gives you a no, we look at that no like, okay, well, this wasn't going to work out anyways, and then you move on. Or because I handled that person with such respect and didn't pressure, they weren't ready, but I also got a referral because they told the story about how kind I was, how I listened, how I respected how they were feeling, and I ended up getting a referral because how I treated that person, and that's how I would want to be treated.
Yeah, no, I love that is, it gets back to what you were talking about with the relationships, and thinking, rather than transaction, think about that long-term relationship. But I also think about companies where, if you terminate a service and they make it an easy experience, like, okay, you can cancel a service. It's not a big deal. We appreciate your business. Sorry that you're leaving, blah, 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 and they make it really nice. Or you have the company that is really nasty when you try to terminate a service and you go, wow, I will never do business with that company again.
Mm-hmm.
And they lose sight of like the fact that like maybe you don't need that service for a couple of years, because of your circumstances. Like you mentioned, it's just not the right time. But it's like, do you burn that bridge as a provider, as a consultant, as a salesperson, whatever? Or do you say, like you did very graciously, that, this is okay. It's not a great time, for us to work together, but that's not a big deal because we're building a relationship. And I absolutely love that. I want to highlight one other thing that you mentioned is you talk about empathy. And I think empathy is a huge thing that's missed in financial services.
Mhm.
Is why do you think empathy is missing from so many of our conversations?
I think it comes from the top down sometimes in companies. I'm the face of my company. So everything I do, from client to speaking engagements to podcasts, anything that's me. I would hate for someone to go, wow, I met you at this networking group and you were totally different when I saw you on a podcast. You were way nicer on the podcast than meeting you in person. I would have been like, well, that's horrible. So for me, I how I am in business is to the most part how I am and treat people in my personal life. So I think a lot of how we treat people is sometimes cultural in the company. And sometimes those people are the unconventional ones who are the really nice ones because a lot of them say, hey, I'm a customer of this company as well, and I would want to be treated this way. And I love when I hear that. I love to go, yes, I'm a customer of this insurance company, or I'm a customer of this. And so if they were on the other line of that call, they would want to be treated this way. I don't think when people are I don't think empathy is really uh being trained, really, to be honest with you. uh because how do you make money with empathy? I think you can make a lot of money with being empathetic to people, and especially in a climate that we're even in today. I think people need empathy more than ever, and I think we need to understand people's circumstances more than ever. So I have never had a an individualistic kind of mind. I've always been a collective kind of person. I've always been a collaborative type person. And to be honest with you, I think that's part of what makes me unconventional, which is strange because I'd like for more people to be unconventional in that manner. But I don't think it gets sometimes trickled down from the leadership down. And I think that's where possibly there's a disconnect. I think we train people in regards to how to do their job. It's very performance based, or it's very transactionally based. Um, or if we are going to talk about people, it's very scripted. And I don't think you can script empathy. And so I think you bring up a great point. I think being able to um, talk about truly what empathy means, because I find myself saying thank you more to people because it's a rarity because they are showing empathy than not. So I think you bring up a great question around that. What are your thoughts around that, Tony? I'd be curious because I know in your field too, um, it can feel very, very transactional to the client.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think empathy is lacking not only in financial services, but I think in our society
Mhm.
in general. In fact, I'm going through something, and I'm going to call out Apple by name because
Mhm.
they're a company that no longer is showing empathy. Is in the past, if you had a problem with Apple, you could call Apple support and they would actually care and take care of a problem. I'm going through a problem right now where the service rep, I even have written to their executive support team, which is supposed to, help out, and there's no empathy on their part. They don't care. And I think it's a reflection of their cultural values. Is people have talked about how Steve Jobs was completely 100% focused on the customer and the customer experience. And Apple has become, under Tim Cook, a company that's not focused on the customer experience. It's exactly like you've talked about. He's focused on the money, on growing the company. And yeah, Steve Jobs was, he was an imperfect leader. He's a human being.
Mm-hmm.
But when he talked about like, okay, how is this going to help somebody? How can we help our user? How can we make this more simple? How can we, just care about the client, the consumer? And you think back to Steve Jobs, and the one that I think is memorable probably for a lot of people is when he did a presentation about the MacBook Air. And he
Yeah.
didn't talk about how thin it was. He didn't say anything. He said, this fits inside this envelope. And so people could say, wow, that's something, and maybe, and now I'm getting a little bit away from empathy, but it's something that people could take away and, okay, this is something that's designed to help me. And I think that does trickle down, as you say, from leadership, because we forget that in financial services, that the products and services that we have are supposed to be helping people. When we talk about insurance and life insurance, the purpose of insurance is to help somebody get by after the loss of a loved one, is to provide cash. And that is a wonderful service. But instead, the life insurance industry has become this industry about like, yeah, use life insurance for investing and all these different things. And it's transactional. We don't care that 90% of people are going to lapse their cash value life insurance policy in the first 5 years, because that doesn't matter to us. What matters to us is, as you said, that we get the transaction, instead of remembering that we're building a relationship with our clients. So what you say is, I've gone on a long tangent about this, is that the empathy is very clear. And to, bring the end to this long monologue, is that life insurance companies used to be run, when I started in the business, by life insurance agents. So
Mm-hmm.
they were people who actually had sat across from a person who had bought a life insurance policy. They had delivered a death claim. They understood what the business was really about, and they understood what clients really wanted from a life insurance company. But now they're run by business people. And so they're run by accountants, or they're run by, Wall Street professionals. And so they're focused on that next quarter, they're focused on the number, they're focused on their metrics instead of being focused on the people. So yeah, I am with you 100%, is we need to talk about empathy. We need to think about it. And in the age of AI, this is going to become a defining differentiator for us who want to continue to be consultants of any type. So that's my whole diatribe. I mean, how do you feel AI is going to
Yeah.
impact us?
Oh, I think it's, I will tell you, I sort of have a love kind of hate relationship with it. And what I mean by that is there are certain AI things that within my business really helps me with a lot. So it helps me, ChatGPT is great. I mean, it really helps me kind of concise things, helps me sort of get my thoughts together. But at the same time, I want to make sure that it still sounds like me. So it can help me do things in a faster, maybe more efficient way. But I also want to make sure that if someone's receiving something from me, that it would be something that I would say, it would sound like me. And so I think that that's really important. And I was, in fact, talking to someone who was very surprised that we did this. But on my podcast, every episode, yes, is run through AI. However, it is then gone back through. So some of these podcasts can be between 45 and minutes and an hour. But it is important to me that it is gone back and grammatically corrected. And so each one of those, when you see it, yes, it was AI, but then a human went through to make sure, because I didn't want a ton of ums. I didn't want triple I's. I didn't want my business name to be misspelled. I didn't want my guest name or my name to be misspelled. And so in some ways, it's really great, but on other terms, I feel that it can cause us to be a bit lazy from a writing standpoint or a communication standpoint, where that empathy can or the communication may not come out best. It does concern me that with AI, that it is going to take out the human factor. And I think it will slow things down. I don't think it has been perfected yet. But to know that there's not in some industries a human check and balance, I think it does worry me. It worries me greatly because I think there's certain industries we do need human beings for proper communication. I think for to show empathy, to help us come up with options that can help us make better business, personal, or life kind of decisions in your particular business. So it does worry me that we are removing a huge human factor uh, for us to again still maintain this very robotic cultural world. And I think I think there'll be a lot of people making a lot of money off of it. But I don't foresee it really helping the greater humanity, if you will.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think you said actually at the very beginning something that's super important is people's names being spelled correctly.
Yeah.
AI doesn't care if it spells your name correctly or not, because
Yeah.
that's not what it's about. I think,
Mhm.
my personal opinion is that we've been thinking about AI to some degree in the wrong way, is it's a tool and it's an alien intelligence. And yeah, it may be smarter than us in a lot of ways, and it already is like an AI passed the Chartered Financial Analyst exam, which is the hardest exam in financial services
Mhm.
by far, and it passed. So AI is smarter, probably smarter than me right now. But, but it's not the same. It's different, and it's a tool. And, yeah, maybe it's going to develop a personality, and they're saying that AI is already doing that, but it's going to be a different personality. And as you point out, it's like, do you care? And is AI going to care? I think that's the big question. And so when you come back and you say the check and balance is, I think that's very important, is
Mhm.
that human element when you think of, because some of us have already dealt with AI customer service, and it's not the same experience as you talk about with the insurance company much earlier, with the person being empathetic. Yeah, maybe someday AI will be empathetic. I'm sure they're working on training it to be, but it's not going to be the same as a human. So, with that said, let's go into the Get Ready Hot Take Trio. These are three questions that I ask all of my guests at the
Oh,
end of the
all
show.
right. I'm ready.
Uh, yes, these are more quick fire questions.
Okay.
The first one is, what's one money myth about money culture you'd like to break, or about communication?
Oh my gosh. I didn't even think about that. Repeat that question for me.
Sure. What's one myth you'd like to break about communication, money culture?
I, gosh, that's a really interesting one. Um, I I think there's a myth. I was kind of part of the old school where, the only way you could invest money was in like bonds, mutual funds, and all that. And I will probably say what has been really cool. I mean, real estate obviously is another way you can invest money and all that. But what I think has been really great is knowing that, being able to invest, for example, like in women-owned businesses or in other, like investing your money um, in other really unique ways instead of some of the traditional ways, I think has kind of been really exciting. And I grew up kind of in that sort of old school, like this is sort of how you invest your money, and this is how you should do it, and this is how many times you should do it. And I think that whole world has just kind of changed and have gotten really, exciting with what people are doing and how they're investing their money.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm glad you brought up investing for women. I'm going to give a shout out to Janine Firpo and her organization, Invest for Better. I'll put a link in the show notes so people who've been listening to the podcast is Invest for Better runs investing circles and investing clubs for women.
Oh,
But really, they're focused on values aligned investing. And so for women who've been reticent, to get into investing because they feel intimidated or they feel put off by the traditional financial services industry. Invest for Better is a nonprofit. I have no stake in them or anything except just being a huge fan of Janine and her work. So I would suggest, if you're a woman and you want to invest in a different way, especially in line with your values, just check out Invest for Better. So that's my little commercial for Invest for Better. And we'll get
yeah.
back to our conversation with Allison now. So Allison, let's get out the time machine for now, for a minute. What advice would you give to your younger self, knowing what you know now about money and or communication?
I wish, I my parents were wonderful from the standpoint that they always encouraged us to learn about the stock market, understand about that. They also believed in investing in ourselves. I do come from a family of other entrepreneurs. Um, and so I would probably say to myself, I wish I took more risks and wasn't as conservative as I was uh, earlier on. Because I think those are the years that, it's okay to make mistakes, learn about other, ways to, either invest or try different, be an entrepreneur in something that you really didn't think you were going to necessarily really like or enjoy. So I kind of wish, I wasn't maybe as conservative, and I wish I wasn't as fearful to really do those things, because being fearful is really just a waste of time and energy. So I probably would have told my younger self that.
Well, that's awesome advice. And I think that gets back to a lot of the things that you've been talking about is, being a little bit unconventional, but really, I think the most important thing that you mentioned earlier that ties back into this is believing in yourself
Yes,
and
for sure.
trusting yourself that you can make those decisions. And that's the thing is with a show, that's what I'm really trying to show is the world of money is for everyone and that you can look at it from these different ways. Because you and I haven't talked about any financial service or products. We've talked about communication and all that. So the last question is, what is your top tip for people, your number one tip for changing the way we think about communication and being conventional?
I really think about, how do you want to be treated? I mean, I really honestly feel that way, because I am in no way a perfect person. And I can get passionate, say things I regret. But at the end of the day, I really need to make sure that I feel good about the work that I'm doing and the work that I'm doing for my clients. I mean, it just is just really, really, really important to me. And
And I
and
think
being
that, oh,
yeah, and excuse me, and just saying, in my level of communication, I think there's I'll give you a perfect example. I had a client that was a miscommunication about it, and I think I don't know whose miscommunication it was. And at the end of the day, does it really matter? What really matters is, and I don't mind saying I'm sorry and sincerely sorry for something if there was anything on my end that could have prevented us from moving forward on something. But for me, it's really about addressing that issue and then being able to figure out how we can move forward and communicate and better, because I want to be able to help my clients to the utmost best of my ability that I possibly can, and really communicating clearly and effectively as I possibly can. I think sometimes when we're communicating because we want to win our point, or we want our thought to overpower someone else's thought. That's not my level of communication. I may not necessarily agree with what my client wants to do, but as long as it's morally, ethically, and something that I'll be more than happy to do that. But I also want to make sure that they understand the pros, the cons, and the in between of that. And as long as they do, then I will absolutely do my best to be able to achieve what it is that they're asking. And that is at the end of the day really, really important to me.
That's awesome. I love that. And I love that part about, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, where the issues stem from, because, sometimes sometimes you can't even figure it out where
Right.
it stemmed
Yeah.
from, but it's not going to help going back. I mean, it's good to learn, of course, from your mistakes,
100%. 100%. Yeah.
but it does matter what you do moving forward. That's the important thing, is, to keep moving forward and coming up with a plan. So, Allison, where can people learn more about you, your work with Unconvention, and the Unconversations podcast?
Yeah. So people can reach the company at www.unconventionllc.com. People can also message me at allison@unconventionllc.com directly. Also, the podcast is on YouTube. It is on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, and you just need to look up on conversations, and the "un" is in parentheses. And it is both on video and audio.
Well, that's awesome. And for everybody watching and listening, if you have access to the show notes, all these links will be in the show notes. Allison, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you, Tony. I really appreciate this has been fun, and it's been really an honor for me. Thank you so much.
Well, it's great to have you on, and it's a lot of fun for me as well. And I hope the audience, you had fun tuning into this episode of the Before Life Happens podcast. You can go to my website at tonystewart.com to subscribe to my newsletter and get access to a whole bunch of free resources to help you use money as a force for good in your own life. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe and to tell a friend. Until next time.